drums are way too reverberant, far too me. And it's slow. It sounds weak and unbelievable. Sings are doing well, but to what end? So we gave up on that.
Sounds like he's banging on pots and pans.
Yeah, we went into a studio in Minneapolis. So here's our next attempt. It's faster, no drums, shaker instead. But it's dry. It's like in your face dry. It's like this in its way is as bad as the previous one. Well,
That maracas?
it's a shaker. With a egg full of salt. Okay. We now run out of money. So Eric Light, who writes for Stereophile, was producing and said, well, what if you had drums? I said, we don't have drums. He said, well, take the drums from Goshen. That's all I had. Those two measures. It's slow. So I took that measure, I added that rim shot to start, and I looped the track. Played that same measure over and over again. And then I added a bass guitar in my living room. So now I have to speed the drums up to match the studio recording of the voices. I then added the bass guitar. I had to detune continually because they start off in G flat and then slowly drift down. So like every chorus, tune down just a little bit. So then I married it to the dry choir recording and added some reverb to the choir. This is what was released. I also felt the choir came in too quickly. So I looped in some of the intro back to the form of the intro. The question is, what is the absolute sound of that recording? It's completely fake. It's two different acoustics, the choir in the dry studio, the drums in the wet hall in Indiana, which I sped up and looped, and my own bass guitar, which I fed directly into the recorder, so there's no acoustic at all on that. And I would I would guess that 99.99% of all recordings you have in your collection are actually made like this. They are completely, totally artificial. It doesn't mean they're not good recordings. It doesn't mean that you can't enjoy them. But if you're going to use a recording like that to judge an audio system, where's the absolute sound? What can you compare with it? You can be misled. If I play you the turning with the space on, with the distant mic, it's very reverberant. The cardioids, it's very dry. So if you just take any recording out of collection to judge the quality of an audio component before you decide to buy it or whatever, you can't just play one recording. You can be fooled because you could say, well, these speakers make that recording sound too dry. Well, it's on the recording. It's not anything to do with the speakers. If you play the reverberant one, you think, well, and there's no good stereo image. Well, that's also a part of a recording. It isn't anything to do with what you're listening to and the hardware. So what we do as reviewers is we play lots and lots of recordings. We don't know how they were made, but we feel that the more recordings you play, common factors will start to come out. if every recording you play doesn't have enough bass, well, it's extremely unlikely that every recording was made with just cardioid mics. So possibly that is a true quality of the component. If every recording has superbly defined stereo, then probably that's also a factor of the components you're listening to. So the idea, which sounds great in principle, that you compare the sound of this speaker with the absolute sound of real music in real acoustic music in real space, sounds good, but it's flawed because there is no absolute sound on the recording. It's what I said earlier. It's artifice in the service of art. That's what recording engineers do. And while we all pay lip service to, yes, you know, only made a documentary recording of this event, well, you're on session, you know, I said about that Deck the Halls, we ran out of money. Yes, we tried recording it in Goshen, Indiana. We then went to a studio in Minneapolis. We're out of money. There's no point in investing any more money in this project, so what can we do if we don't have any money? All engineers have to deal with the fact that when you're making a recording, the clock is ticking, and your money is ticking away. I was producing a recording of Mozart's Clarinet Concerto in London in 2003, and London, lovely hall, Henry Wood Hall, we had 2 sessions, 2 3-hour sessions, and a union orchestra. And the union orchestra means you can only record so much money per hour, and if you go over at the end of the second session, you're into overtime pay, which makes it really expensive. So we do the first session, it's 3 hours, we produce the first movement of a Mozart, we're all really pleased with it. And the second session, we're halfway through and we haven't finished the second movement. And I'm watching the clock and I'm thinking, you know, we have to get the third movement done before we run out of time and money. We did it, but it was sweaty. So, yeah, recordings are artificial. They are creations intended to resemble what you would have heard in the case of classical music, or in rock music. There never was an original, like in The Night and Day. Doing time. I'll play you this one. This is a recording I made. It was 2014, and I got invited. Eric Light, who was the music director of Cantus, that choir, he left the band. He went to Portland to do his masters in conducting, and they had and still have a wonderful choir, student choir, the Portland State Chamber Choir. So he's there, and he says, "You know, John, how difficult is it for you to get across the country to Portland to do recordings?" I said, "Well, I'd have to ship everything UPS." "Oh, that's all right, we'll pay for that." Okay, so I shipped all my gear to Portland and recorded their choir. And this is an arrangement of the old classic Amazing Grace. I recorded it with exactly the same mic technique I did on that Maura Bosch piece. Pair of cardioids to get good stereo, pair of omnis to get good bass and bloom, and another pair of mics further back to capture a little bit more reverb if I need it in the mix. This is an arrangement by the Latvian composer Eriks Esenvalds, he's making wonderful music. He writes wonderful music, but this is an arrangement by him. It's just, well, anyway, I'll play it to you. I made one change to my mic technique. The girl soloist, Jenna McAllister, has a voice of an angel, but it's not a very big voice. So she's soloing, but she's not quite separated enough from the choir. So I put a close mic on her, brought it into the mix in the right place and space, so that I could just pop her out a little bit. Again, artifice in the service of art.
Love
That chord. I'll tell you about it later. Yeah, that chord, if you notice, that arrangement modulates key all the time. Every verse and chorus is in a different key, but it happens so organically and naturally, you don't really notice, other than the sense of forward movement it gives the music. That chord I mentioned, I'm fascinated by it. Everybody knows that if you play two notes a half step apart, it's a dissonance, it's horrible. That chord is an open fifth, and then another open fifth with each note exactly a half step away. Two sets of dissonant notes, but it sounds just this glorious gear change effect that it takes you into the final refrain. It's just, my God, this is great choral music writing. Eric Essenbals, he's like 35 years old. How does somebody so young get to be so clever? So I'll play you one more track, and then we can have some questions and answers, if you like. So, I told you, 40 years ago, I gave up my career as a musician to join Hi-Fi News magazine as an editorial assistant, because I didn't quite give up my musical career. I kept it going, and in '77, the band I was in, we had, well, no, getting things mixed up. The Night and Day was from '77. Before I joined Hi-Fi News, we had an album out on DJM, which was Elton John's label, and this is a track from that. It's called Blues for Beginners. There's only three of us in the band. The singer wrote the song, plays guitar, plays all the keyboards, plays synthesizer. The drummer who also plays percussion, and I play bass guitar. I provide a choir of clarinets in the bridge, and I'm also one of the backing voices. So this is Blues for Beginners from the Obie Clayton Band's one and only album, which when we got reviewed, they said it was fantastic, we were the new Beatles.
Yeah.
Sales stopped at that point. The point is, when you read reviews, reviewers can be wrong. So, this is Blues for Beginners from 1975. Or it will be when this thing wakes up. Here we go.
Sing the blues.
These blues for beginners gonna stay. She's got me lying in a cold, cold sweat, and I'm slowly turning gray. She won't be pleased till she takes my breath away. Gone away, gone away. Ooh, those blues for beginners. Ooh, those blues for beginners. Ooh, those blues for beginners. Those blues for
So just to remember, this is a real sound. Everything you heard on that recording, bass guitar, clarinets, drums, harmonica, voices, sound of a cigarette, is all an illusion constructed in your head from the two pairs of pressure waves coming from the speakers and your brain working to decode them, to decide that must be what happened. The question is, if you've never heard drums or a guitar or bass guitar or a harmonica or a cigarette lighted a match, would you know what that was? Something to think about. Okay, thank you. Any questions about the magazine or recordings or music?
Who's doing the lead vocal?
Yeah.
There was a man called, well, we were the Obie Clayton band. The singer was a man called Michael Cox, who also recorded as Matthew Ellis in England. He retired from music around soon after this.
Why?
And he became a best-selling mystery writer.
Wow, that was Billy Joel.
No,
As a hint of Billy Joel in there.
Billy Joel, but this is
More
before
like
Billy
10cc.
Joel.
Sounds like 10cc.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there was in the atmosphere, in the air around about
Oh,
then.
yeah.
And yeah, he became a best-selling mystery writer, and then he died about 5 years ago. He had
Yeah.
cancer, tumor behind his eye. Great,
What a voice.
great talent he was.
Yeah, what a voice.
And
Very distinctive.
we never made it. Yeah. Any more questions? I mean, the magazine or reviewing or music?
Do you have any concerns with phase problems between the different pairs of mics when you have one so close
Oh,
and
yes.
someone?
I mean, in
how do you
post-
deal with that?
You couldn't do it in the days of analog recording. But when I make recordings, every take starts with me, somebody, not me, but one of the singers or musicians standing in the exact center of the stage with a slapstick and going, slap. So I get a big impulse on every track. Then in post-production on my digital audio workstation, I slide the microphones backwards and forwards in time till they align. Now I know there won't be the phase problems that you mentioned could happen, but you couldn't do that in the analog days. You know, not at all, I don't think, very easily. So yes, it's very important to do that in post-production, is to align the microphones in time. And of course now you can do that, because you know, time becomes just another variable in the mix.
And when you mix some of these choral recordings, are you EQing, are you compressing, or are you leaving them
I'm
pure?
adding a little bit of bass boost on the cardioids, just because cardioids roll off in the low frequencies. What I do also when I'm on a project, like the Amazing Grace that you heard. So before I record any music, the choir is arranged in an arc in front of the mic array. And I get them to sound off who they are, announce their name, and then each one of them, I know where they are in space. And when I'm doing the mix, I listen to the image of all those voices. Where are they? And if, say, I mix in too much of the space harmonies, now I start to hear the voice of singers to the sides get a bit too big, a bit too wide, and the singers in the center start to lose definition. So I'm listening all the time when I'm mixing. Am I making it better or am I making it worse? And in my mind is the memory of what they sounded like in the hall. as fallible as that may be, nevertheless, it's what I have to go on. So yes, I'm checking what I do all the time, that I'm not making it worse. And even on the turning that I played earlier, this one. If you listen very, very, very carefully, the images of the voice of the singers to the sides are a little bigger than they are in the centers. I decided I could live with that. Because it gave me, then if I tried to correct for that, I lost some of that bloom, that lovely ambience of that hall in Indiana. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. You're balancing all these practical things against the platonic ideal that was in your head. One of the things I do on my recordings, and I don't think this is common, I spend a lot of time getting the hall quiet. For that recording, Eric Light, the producer, and I, we got to a hall early, set up all the gear, and then we said, okay, let's just sit and listen to the silence. So you listen. You go, what's that noise? There's a hum. So the hall staff, you know, was so helpful. That's the power supply for the emergency lighting, and it's in the roof. Can we turn it off? Yes, after 5 o'clock when the staff go. Okay, so 5 o'clock comes, we turn that off. Listen again. What's that noise? Ah, well that's for heating. Can we turn that off? Yes. Okay, turn off the heating. All right, what's that noise? Because all the time we're trying to get the quietest possible hall, because yes, you can filter out stuff and it always makes the sound worse. But if you can get the hall as quiet as possible before you make the recording, you have a good place to start. And on that recording, there is a very tiny bit of rumble, and it's from a fountain a quarter mile away. We couldn't do anything about that, but okay, we'll live with that because it is extremely low in level. Yeah, so, you know, pre-production, post-production on recordings like this is time-consuming. And again, we are doing this to create the facsimile, a recreation of what we feel it should sound like. But it's not a documentary recording. It's not just capture the sound in the hall, because microphones are not ears and brains. They are, you know, they're stupid. So you have to compensate for their stupidity with artifice.
That's a nice question. I listen to a lot of old jazz, you know, bop and, you know, hard bop. I have a lot of original recordings. How much post-production changes were done by the engineers back
Don't know, probably
back
some
then?
equalization,
Yeah.
some compression if you look at Rudy Van Gelder's
Right.
recordings. Close mics on all the instruments, but the mix was created live,
Right.
and probably there was some sweetening done in the mastering, equalization, maybe a bit of compression, but not
Not to do-
much mixing
more.
after the
Right.
event.
Okay. That's what I thought.
They're all purist in that sense.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When I got started listening to audio back in the early 70s, one thing that always annoyed me was listening to a voice on one record,
Yeah,
and it sounded like the voice was right there.
yeah.
And then on other records, it sounded like they were talking through a tin cup.
I can demonstrate that.
Well,
On the
but
first
that
step-
wasn't my question. But okay.
All right, let me just tell you this. On
Go
the
ahead.
first Stereophile test CD, I recorded J. Gordon Holt, magazine's founder, with as many microphones as I could get. And I recorded him reading an early essay from the magazine, and pretty much every sentence is a different microphone. And you should hear the sound change dramatically according to which microphone was in use.
Mhm.
Why Hi-Fi Experts Disagree, by me, J. Gordon Holt. From Stereophile, Volume 1, Issue 4, dated March, April 1960.